Pope Leo XIV has recently made a set of statements that are creating serious conversations around the Catholic world. These are not small remarks or passing thoughts. Instead, they carry weight and meaning that could shape how the Catholic Church moves forward, especially in how it relates to its own traditions and to the Eastern Orthodox churches. What is being talked about is something many Catholics might not have expected: a possible return to deeper spiritual roots that are more aligned with the traditions of the East. While the Pope has not officially declared any changes, what he has said is causing many to wonder: is the Church being invited to rediscover the richness and depth of Eastern Christian tradition? The Pope recently addressed the Eastern Catholic communities with words that surprised many. He spoke about the need for the Western Church to rediscover what he called a sense of mystery and beauty in how it worships. He didn't just talk about aesthetics or style. He spoke about something deeper, a spiritual way of praying and worshiping that brings people closer to the divine. This approach, he said, is alive and well in the Eastern Christian churches, and the West can learn something vital from them. One of his strongest concerns was about the way some modern liturgies in the West have changed. He warned against what he called spectacle and consumerism that seemed to be creeping into how Mass is celebrated in some places. This is not just a matter of taste. It's a question of how sacred worship is supposed to feel and what it's supposed to lead us toward: mystery, reverence, and the presence of God. The Pope seemed to be asking everyone to pause and think about whether our worship today is still focused on the holy or whether it's become more of a performance. But the Pope didn't stop at talking about worship. He went further. He began to speak about synodality, a word that might sound unfamiliar to many, but one that carries a very old and meaningful tradition. Synodality refers to how the Church governs itself. Instead of relying on decisions made only at the top, synodality gives more voice to local communities, local bishops, and regional councils. It's a model of governance that comes from the early centuries of Christianity and is still practiced today in many Eastern Orthodox churches. For them, the Church is not just a single organization run from the top down, but a communion of local churches that walk together in unity. By bringing this idea forward again, Pope Leo is not simply copying the East. He's pointing to something that used to be part of Catholic life too, a shared heritage from the first 1,000 years of the Church. Back then, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, was seen as a central figure of unity, but local bishops still had strong voices in leading their communities. There was balance, conversation, and shared responsibility. What Pope Leo seems to be doing now is bringing that vision back into focus. This isn't just about church structure. It's about the whole spirit of how the Church lives. The Pope is reminding the Church that unity doesn't have to mean uniformity. Just because we are one church doesn't mean every local church must look and sound exactly the same. Instead, we can be united in faith and love while expressing our worship and community life in different meaningful ways. And that's where the conversation about the East becomes especially important. The Pope's message isn't entirely new, but it feels new because of how strongly and clearly it's being said today. Over a century ago, Pope Leo XIII also made similar statements. He declared that the Eastern Catholic traditions were not only to be respected but protected. He was so serious about this that he said any Latin Rite clergy who tried to change or weaken Eastern traditions should be removed from office. That kind of defense of the East was rare in the past. And now Pope Leo XIV is bringing that same spirit back, making it a priority for the Church again. In a recent Vatican document, Pope Leo emphasized that Eastern rites are not a side feature of the Catholic Church. They are essential parts of its full identity. He stressed that for Eastern Catholics living outside their homelands, keeping their traditions is more important than many people realize. The Church must support them, help them build communities, and preserve their worship and customs. This is not just about nostalgia. It's about recognizing that these traditions carry spiritual treasures that can enrich the whole Church. The Pope made clear that preserving Eastern identity is not a threat to unity, is a strength. In fact, by holding on to both Eastern and Western traditions, the Church can breathe fully, like two lungs working together. This beautiful image reminds us that the Church is not meant to be flat or one-sided. It is meant to be full, alive, and diverse in expression, while staying united in truth. The Pope's vision is not about blending everything together into one uniform way. He is not asking the East to become more like the West, or the West to copy the East blindly. Instead, he is calling for mutual learning. Each side has something unique to offer. The East brings a deep sense of mystery, beauty, and theological reflection. The West brings structure, mission, and universality. Together, they can form a church that is both grounded and open, rich in prayer and powerful in service. The dicastery for the Eastern Church is a Vatican department that focuses on the needs of Eastern Catholics to help make this vision practical. He wants clear guidelines so that Latin bishops, especially those outside traditionally Eastern areas, will actively support Eastern Catholic communities. These communities need help, not just to survive, but to thrive. Their spiritual identity matters, and the Pope wants that to be protected. But beyond protecting Eastern traditions, the Pope is also returning to that other major theme, synodality. This idea continues to make some people nervous, especially in traditionalist circles in the West. Some worry that synodality means too much change or too much influence from secular ideas. Others fear it might weaken the Pope's authority. But Pope Leo is trying to show that synodality is not about rebellion or division. It's about listening, about shared leadership, and about going back to the roots of how the Church once governed itself. He isn't rejecting papal authority. Instead, he seems to be rebalancing how that authority is used. The Pope remains the central figure of unity, but that unity is now being expressed through cooperation with local bishops and churches, not just through commands from the top. This model is not new. It's actually very older than the medieval papacy and more in line with the first centuries of the Christian faith. By looking at church history, we can see that this isn't a break from tradition. It's a recovery of a more ancient model. In the early church, bishops met in local synods, shared wisdom, and guided their communities. The Pope played a key role, especially in guarding unity and truth. But he didn't run everything from Rome. This shared responsibility created space for different traditions to grow, for different forms of worship to develop, and for local cultures to shape how the faith was lived. And this brings us back to a major question. What does all of this mean for the Latin Mass? What Pope Leo is bringing to the surface is not just a discussion about church politics or leadership. He's bringing forward a much larger question: how should the Church worship? How should the Church live? And how should different traditions inside the Church relate to one another? For many Catholics, especially those who care deeply about the Latin Mass, this is where things start to feel personal. Over the past few years, there have been tensions about the place of the traditional Latin liturgy in church life. Some communities have felt pushed to the margins. Others have felt ignored or misunderstood. There have been restrictions, changes, and confusion. But now, with Pope Leo's words and tone, many are asking, could the Latin Mass be on the edge of a new opening? Let's take a closer look at the Pope's vision. He's made it clear that he values tradition, not only Eastern traditions, but Western ones as well. He is not asking for the West to abandon its past. In fact, his focus on reverence, mystery, beauty, and spiritual depth speaks directly to what many Latin Mass communities have been trying to preserve. These communities often emphasize silence, sacred music, ancient prayers, and a strong sense of the sacred. In many ways, they have been trying to hold on to the very things the Pope says the Church needs more of. So now the question becomes, will this new direction include space for the Latin Mass to grow again? The Pope hasn't made a final decision yet, but his words have opened the door to serious conversation. He speaks of a church that learns from its roots. He calls for greater pastoral care. He praises the idea of local bishops having more say in how worship is lived out in their own regions. All of these point to a possible future where the Latin Mass is not just tolerated, but supported, especially if it's practiced in a spirit of communion, love for the Church, and faithfulness to her teachings. But this vision is not just about bringing back the past. It's about going deeper. The Pope is inviting the whole Church to reflect more seriously on how we worship. Are we drawing people into an encounter with God? Or are we just putting on a show? Are we connected to the long story of our faith? Or are we treating Mass like a weekly event